Good afternoon, class. This is Instructor Cumberland, and today we're going to do a lecture on heartwood versus sapwood. There's a throwback. But that's actually what we're going to do. Welcome to East Coast Lumberjack. And today we are going to talk about the difference between heartwood and sapwood. Now, the old East Coast Lumberjack spent his career as a certified wildlife biologist. So I spent a lot of time researching. And if I needed to know something about what, I guess I started my career, and it was beaver. Beaver was the first thing that we had a little debate on. And there was a trapper back in the day, and he was saying there was a lot of beaver on Graham and Ann, and they should have been a season. And I thought, gee, I don't know how many beaver are on Graham and Ann. So I had to sit down and do some research. So I went through a lot of journals to find out, how do you estimate beaver numbers? Well, you fly streams and brooks, certain percentage of them, and actually you count the number of beaver lodges and food caches for the winter, and the time to survey is in the fall of the year. And once I figured out how to do all that, then we went about and did it, and I learned a fair bit about beaver, and then we published a little bit of technical report as a result. So did the same thing with pine marten, and then we were studying bobcat. How was the best way to manage bobcat? So again, you go to the journals, places where researchers have spent a lot of time researching a certain question, and then they publish their findings in a journal. Okay, now we could talk about this ad libitum, but I know you guys probably don't give a hoot about how all that stuff works. Now, for most of my career, if it was published in a journal, you could take it to the bank. But the latter part of my career, when I get into a lot of looking into herbicides and other things, there was a lot of funny stuff going on in the literature, and the people that were publishing what they wanted to say, which was not necessarily what should have been said. So anyways, I used to live and die and breathe by journals and articles and published papers. And then of course the last the last bit of my career, it really got tainted. Okay, and then there was a lot of messing around. The companies that wanted to promote whatever they wanted got involved in the research. They started spending the money on it. And I saw a lot of stuff I wish I hadn't have. But nonetheless, if you want to learn something about a topic, you go to the literature, see what the science has found out. So what we're going to talk about today is heartwood versus sapwood. And this is hotly debated in the wood worlds, okay? So here's a PV handle. I showed you this last week. If I can get the light on it right there. Okay, now this here's a dark heartwood. Okay, you see that? Nice and pretty. And this is sapwood. And I've got, it's called a salt and pepper handle here at East Coast Lumberjack. And I've got this handle half and half. And I'm going to put this in a PV stock for my son. But it's a pretty neat looking rig. And I make these every now and then. If I get how these come about, here's a good example right here on the end. Okay, you can see half of it's salt and half its pepper. Now, how this comes about is if you're looking at the end of a log, the sapwood is the white wood on the outside. Okay, that's the sapwood. Now, at East Coast Lumberjack, I like taking my handlewood out of the sapwood. I do that for a number of reasons, but first of all, because that's your biggest part of your wood, and if you take a wedge-shaped piece out of that big log, that wedge-shaped piece is going to have the grain out here almost parallel with the length of your eye. Okay, so, and that's, we know from tests. Go back to some of my first videos. I took wood in to the UNB wood facility and at the Hugh John Fleming Forest Center, and we busted up a bunch of wood to say which is stronger, grain going across the eye or grain going with the eye. And it was statistically better to have your grain going the length of the eye. Okay, so that's why most people do it that way. It's a stronger handle. The other thing is, if your wood ever separates on the grains, and you do your grain going this way across the eye, then down here in your handle, the grains are going to go this way. So if it splits off, you lose part of your palm swell, or it'll do it up here where you don't want it to happen at the base of at the shoulder, basically. Okay, so sometimes, and when I've been buying a bit of hickory over the years. Now I don't worry about sapwood a lot or heartwood a lot in ash, because white ash has very small heartwood. Okay, and in hickory wood though, however, heartwood gets pretty big, and sometimes I've gotten wood with just an inch or so of sapwood, white sapwood on the outside, and the rest of it's heartwood. So when I split that off, of course, I get that half and half. I get half that, an inch of my handle bolt is sapwood, and then the other inch of it is, of course, heartwood. So the question is heartwood as good as sapwood? Now, so when I split these out, what happens? So here's a block here I split out, okay? And of course, it's always the shape of a piece of pie, okay? So these are two that are together, but this is pretty much what I split out of the block, okay? I go around the outside of it and I split this off. Now, if it's big enough, when I split this outside piece, that's where all my sapwood is. But if I can get a nice straight piece, which this one here is, out of the next one in, I'm taking that. And I'm taking it a lot more because what we learned in splitting out wood is if I can split off this inside triangle and make this side is the same size as this, when I'm splitting it out, it splits straight down the grain. Okay, thanks, Chris Wasta from Ohio or Iowa taught me that, and that was a really neat thing to learn. So now what I do, I split off this inside triangle, get rid of that. When these two pieces are the same size, my split will come straight down my handle wood, okay? And it makes it nice and straight. But what that means is typically, if I've only got 2 to 3 inches of sapwood out here, this inside piece, as you can tell from this one, is heartwood. It's beautiful, dark heartwood. Now, hickory heartwood is not only beautiful when you BLO it, as far as smoking goes, that heartwood with all the resins and phenols in there, it smokes beautiful. Now, the old East Coast Lumberjack sells hickory smoking blocks. So I'm keeping a lot of that stuff now because I want that in my hickory smoking blocks because it really adds to the flavor. So the question is, should we use heartwood? Is heartwood as tough as sapwood? Okay? Is it structurally sound? Is it as dense? The questions go on and on. So the old East Coast Lumberjack's going to answer that for you right now. Okay? So I did a lot of reading. Okay? And I've got some papers here. I've got a paper from Australia. I've got a paper from America, U.S. Forest Research Service. I've got a paper from the UK, England, and I've got a paper from Turkey, okay, from over in Asia. Okay, 2020, so it's a very recent paper. Okay, and the other one, where's this other one from? I got 5 of them here. The other one is from Michael Snyder. Okay, he's an American as well. Okay, so Americans, I've got 2 from America. So what do they say? Now, let's start first of all and talk about this from a genetic perspective, okay? Because really, you've got a tree that's growing, okay? Now, is it good wood? Is it bad wood? It's a tree, okay? And we know, I've told you before, that all the growth in the tree occurs right inside the bark, okay? That's where the cambium is, and that's where the wood growth occurs. So every spring, as we're getting into spring right now, inside there, the sap is starting to flow and things are starting to happen in the tree, okay? And the leaves, of course, we know make all the sugars and starches, and of course that goes up and down the tree, and the tree starts putting on cells and growing. It's actually, the more you learn about the scientific world, the more incredible it is. And the more we realize this isn't by chance, okay? There's a grand designer that has made this. This stuff just doesn't happen by chance, okay? And it's pretty amazing the way wood grows. So inside the wood, it puts on a growth layer on the inside, and of course it puts on a bark layer on the outside. So the tree basically grows this way. Now, I had a guy just the other day ask me, he said, you know, if you have a knot in a tree, does that keep... No, it doesn't. And we don't realize it. We think if we hang a horseshoe on the low branch, eventually that goes higher and higher. It doesn't. Because the trees, what they do every year, they form buds. So at the ends, at the tips of the branches, at the tip of the tree, they form a bud. And then the next spring, that bud bursts, and the tree grows up from there. Okay, so it keeps getting wider and wider, and the top goes up again, goes up again. But the tree itself does not keep growing, even though we look at it and we see it growing higher and higher. it doesn't actually grow out of the ground higher. It grows from that bud, whoop, up this much, then whoop, up this much, then whoop, up that much again. So it grows at the very top. Now, we know that as that tree's growing, it's exactly the same tree, okay? So when it's small, it's all sapwood, okay? And sapwood is basically where all the water's flowing, okay? Those cells are alive. And that means water and other stuff is going up and down through those cells. They're alive, and their moisture content is higher. Now, as that tree gets growing bigger and bigger, so now it's getting bigger this way, but it's also getting a lot bigger up that way. So what has to happen is it needs structural strength. It needs more strength to maintain itself, that rigidity, so it stays up in the air. So heartwood is what does that, okay? So what happens is, as those cells are growing, now it's the same genetics, okay? So sapwood and heartwood are exactly the same cell. The only difference is in age and moisture content. That's the two differences. Sapwood has more moisture content. Heartwood has less moisture content. And then these are live cells. These are dead cells. But if we look and see what everybody said about this. Now, let's start with an American paper. Okay, so this is from the U.S. Forest Research note. It was in September 1966. Okay, the differences between heartwood and sapwood. So this is it right here. Okay, and you can Google that, find that on the internet, read it for yourself. And they say in over 500,000 tests made by the Forest Products Laboratory on woods grown in the United States, no effect upon the mechanical properties of wood due to its change from sapwood to heartwood has been found in most species. Okay, so what they're saying, same properties, same strength. So they say heartwood of oak and pine and other ones are not intrinsically stronger than sapwood, as has often been supposed to be the case. So typically people think heartwood is stronger. And the reason for that is, number one, the cells are dead, and then they get strengthened by all these phenols and other things that are actually composed and that get accumulated in them. And they're more resistant to rot, they're more resistant to decay, and it's tougher wood, okay, more resilient wood. So they say here, nor is sapwood of hickory and ash intrinsically stronger than the heartwood, as is sometimes claimed in connection with handle stock. Very interesting. So these guys say there's no difference. Now, this is the latest one out of Turkey in 2020. And they say basically dimensional stability is essential. So we need to know whether heartwood and sapwood, if there's any difference between them, because we're using these things in furniture and handles and everything else. So they said, we're going to study. The aim of this study was to reveal the differences between the mechanical properties of sapwood and heartwood, of some of the fastest growing. So the difference is, they didn't. Now we all want to look at the species we use. Okay, I wanted ash. You know, other people wanted hickory, and actually I'm still quite interested in hickory as well. But they looked at all these. So they looked at the compression strength, bending strength, modulus of elasticity, shearing strength parallel to the grain, impacts on bending strength. So these guys looked at all of it. Okay, they looked at everything. But the only problem is they looked at a popple species and a eucalyptus species. So they're fast-growing trees. So as they're growing really fast, they form that heartwood in the middle. What did they find? So let's go to their conclusions. The mechanical properties of sapwood were higher than those of heartwood, except for red pine. So, and they used the t-test, okay, so a statistical test that I'm actually quite familiar with, and it just looks at your values and says, are the numbers different enough that we can say that they are statistically different? And they found that yes, they were. Okay, so now looking at the numbers, they're for popple, they weren't a lot different. Okay, they were quite close. For eucalyptus, they were a little bit farther apart. For red pine, they were very far apart. Okay, so that's just to let you know. So it was fairly close in popple, and then it got a little bit farther apart in eucalyptus, and it got really far apart. So what that means is there's a bigger difference between the heartwood and sapwood in those species. That's according to the guys in Turkey. What about the other guys? What are the guys? Where are these guys from? Oh, these are the UK guys. This is White Knight Consulting. Okay, so these guys deal a lot with wood. Okay, in the UK, and they explain what heartwood and sapwood is. Now, what? So basically, as heartwood is forming, the cells are dying. Okay, and then what happens is they're no longer used to transport materials up and down the tree anymore. So it's basically dead xylem. That's what it's called. And what happens is the moisture content is lower, and extractives such as resins, phenols, oils, and terpenes are responsible for the various properties of wood, such as dark color and durability, resistance to moisture decay, and insect attack. Heartwood is the strongest part of a tree. So these guys disagree with the turkeys. And it says the heartwood is the stronger and darker part of the wood, and the sapwood is typically weaker and lighter colored. Now, doesn't this raise a pile of questions? So now we've got 2-1. What do the Aussies say? So this is from New South Wales. Okay, and these guys did a pretty good job. This is the Forestry Commission in New South Wales. It's a technical bulletin of theirs. It was revised last in 1987. R.K. Bamber was the author of this, okay? So sapwood and heartwood. And it shows a really, like, bird's eye view, like up-close microscopic view of heartwood and sapwood and the differences. And they go through and they talk about the size of it, how it's formed, what it looks like. They also did some testing. Durability. This is what the Aussies say. The greater durability of heartwood over sapwood is attributed to the presence of extraneous materials which are deposited during the transition of sapwood to heartwood. Extraction of these extraneous hardwood substances with suitable solvents reduces the resistance of heartwood to fungal decay. Sapwood is more susceptible to attack by surface molds than is heartwood. Okay. Strength. In most species, there is no significant difference in the strength of sapwood versus heartwood. This is because the cell walls become fully thickened and lignified very close to the cambium, as noted earlier, while sapwood may exhibit some greater flexibility in the green conditions. So that means there's more moisture, it's more flexible. It resists breaking better because of the moisture content, not necessarily because of the DNA or the change in the cell structure. It's because of the moisture. It is well known, however, that brittleness is associated with older wood near the center of the tree. Okay, so Buck and Billy is right when he was busting up handles and showing that when you break sapwood, it stays stringy. When you break heartwood, it seems more brittle. Okay, now the question is, does it take the same amount of force to cause that rupture, whether it's a brittle break or a rupture where it's a stringy break? That's really the question. Okay. So it says in certain uses requiring high strength, for example, axe handles. Hey, that's us. Hickory species, willow species, sapwood is preferred to heartwood. This is largely a customer preference for the even white appearance of sapwood. So the reason for that is because we like the look of it. There is a small crease in the strength of heartwood. Okay, it does say that. In some timbers, having a large amounts of extractives deposited during heartwood formation causes a little bit more strength. And we know in hickory, the heartwood takes on all those extractives because it gets dark. Okay, so it technically is stronger than sapwood. So isn't that interesting? So we've got 3-1 that say heartwood is stronger than sapwood. Now, what I would say is, I think they're very similar, okay? And that's the reason I have them in my handles. Why we have salt and pepper handles at East Coast Lumberjack. Because they're very, very similar. And the only difference is, it's a little bit more brittle in heartwood, and it's a little more moisture, a little bit more flex in the sapwood. okay, which is better for what we're doing, okay, us guys that are swinging axes. So, if you put it in a handle like this, a salt and pepper handle, you get the extra rigidity from the sapwood, or the heartwood, and you get a little bit more flex in the sapwood. Okay, now, I've made these for years and years. None have ever split along that color line. And if you look at that color line, sometimes it goes along the grains. And see this? Sometimes it don't. So it just colors based on where that cell dies. And they don't always die in the growth rings. Sometimes that heartwood goes right across 3 or 4 or 5 growth rings. Okay, so that's not what's happening. The color doesn't tell you a growth ring. Sometimes it will, but not always. Actually, most times it doesn't. So what is the verdict? You know what? And if we did the testing, I would like to take them in and test them, because I'll tell you, it's the same genetics. And the difference in strength is not going to be a lot. And all these papers suggest that, right? There was some difference in the Turkish paper. The Americans and the Aussies say, no, you know what? It's a little bit stronger in heartwood. But what that means for us handle guys, if you want a heartwood handle, go for it. I've even put heartwood handles in racing axes, okay? And you may not get the same amount of flex, but in all honesty, it's going to last, okay? Because it's hickory. So, if you want the pretty color, do not let that stop you that it's heartwood, okay? Never let that stop you. Again, it might be a little bit more brittle. And what that means is, rather than it breaking and staying stringy, it's going to break, and actually there won't be as much string. It'll actually break a little bit cleaner. That's all it means. But it's still going to take a stinking lot of strength to bust it, okay? So, verdict from the East Coast Lumberjack, based on all what we've read and based on years of experience, okay, it's not that big of a deal. So if you like heartwood, go for it. Now, the only problem I have, I want to mention this to you, because before my website goes bananas with people ordering heartwood handles, the problem with these is, because my widest piece of the handle is out here, okay? So my biggest handles. That means, and when I make a sweepy pattern, like a French curve, you're not going to get a French curve out of heartwood, because it's just not big enough. It's not wide enough. So heartwood is for straight handles, hatchet handles, or boy handles, okay, the Hetheringtons. Sometimes I can get chopping handles out of it. Most times I can't, because it's not quite wide enough. Well, throwing axe handles. I make a lot of throwing axe handles out of heartwood, okay, because it's not going to matter. All you're doing is releasing it. It's hitting the target, okay? So these will stand up, as we know. They'll stand up in anything, but in a throwing axe, yeah, no problem at all. So I make a lot of really beautiful double bitters out of heartwood, okay? And I have a lot of it, because, of course, again, it's a smaller piece. So as long as if you got a 3-inch eye, sometimes it's a little bit tight getting a 3-inch one. I'll have to look a little bit harder for that. But on all those other ones, you get that really pretty heartwood, and it's gorgeous. Once you BLO a heartwood handle, you'll fall in love with it. Okay, so that's the East Coast Lumberjack answering the age-old question, is what is better, heartwood or sapwood? Doesn't matter, in my opinion. So they're both really close. Heartwood might be a little bit more brittle. Most of the papers say it's stronger. Say it's definitely more resilient to decay and stuff. So if that matters to you, but it's definitely prettier. And can you make a salt and pepper handle? You bet you can, okay? So if you have any experience with this, put it in the comments down below. Love to hear from you. And what are we doing next week? Oh, next week we're going to see the guitar. Join us again. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button. See you again.